Hey guys, this is Luke Johnson of the Noetic Humanities Teaching app. Go download it for your iPhone and Droid devices. Today we'll be talking a little bit of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, and to help us lead that discussion will be Jennifer Avery. Now, before we get into the discussion of Jane Austen's novel, I'd like for Jennifer just to introduce herself to everyone because it's the first time she's ever taught anything on the Noetic Humanities Teaching app.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Avery, and I'm a writer and an editor. I live in Ringgold, Georgia, and I taught for a year in high school, and I've ever since been really passionate about education, and in particular, uh, more in-depth education study of these novels, particularly Austen and Bronte, and those are my specialties. So that's me.
That's fantastic. So we were talking off air before we got going today, that you had a little bit of background information on Jane Austen and Northanger Abbey. What were you able to dig up?
Okay, well, Jane Austen, of course, most people know about. There's not much that we know about her life and everything like that, and so that's kind of what's important about Austen is her skill and what she did for English literature at the time, in the Regency era when Jane Austen lived, which was the time when George III had been declared insane, and then his son George IV, the King Regent or the Prince Regent, was ruling England at the time, and that's why you call it the Regency period. And at that time, there was a great emphasis placed on birth, family connections and things like that, and people didn't marry for love, they married for financial gain. And during that time, of course, this is in the middle of the Age of Reason as well. Atheism was beginning to become a popular idea, and science, people were beginning to rely more on science than in superstition or in the church. And kind of a response to that were the Gothic romances, or the romantic novels of the period. They were always involved some manner of supernatural power. They were always very unrealistic. They were almost like fairy tales for adults, and they were actually looked down upon by most genteel society, particularly men, as being worthless, as just being entertainment for women. And of course, at this time, women were for marrying and bearing children. That was all women were for, or maybe being a governess if she didn't have good family connections, and that's if she was lucky. But in any case, the Gothic novels. At first, again, they always had particularly had some manner of supernatural involved. There was always a damsel in distress. There was always there's always a handsome hero, and there was always some horrible baron or somebody who was trying to take advantage of this lovely, accomplished girl. Now, Anne Radcliffe came along at this point, and she wrote Gothic novels, but she wrote Gothic novels in which the supernatural aspects were explained. They were explained supernatural aspects in these novels, like it'd be like Scooby-Doo. Like at the end of the episode, somebody was asked. Exactly, yes, that's what Anne Radcliffe did. There's a ghost trying to keep the Harlem Globetrotters from winning the game, and then they figure out that it's the man in the mill disguising himself. That's basically what Anne Radcliffe did.
I love your analogy.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you. But in any case, Anne Radcliffe changed that, and so she was a more reasonable Gothic novelist, and more people accepted her for that reason, because she was kind of shrugging off this idea of there being witches and vampires and things like that. Okay, now Anne Radcliffe was writing at the same time that Jane Austen was. And of course, Jane Austen would have read her novels as any educated woman would at that time. And Northanger Abbey is a response to that. One of the important things about, and this kind of comes into why Jane Austen is so important to English literature. Because at this point, you had Gothic novels and these silly romances, and then comes Jane Austen, who is a realist. And a lot of people don't realize that, but in her comedies of manners, there's a lot more realism involved. Like her heroines might not be wealthy. Her heroines might not be that accomplished. And they might not be that pretty. And that's why she's so important, because up until this point, nobody wrote realism, especially women. And women were lucky even to have anything published. But in her case, it was so incendiary and new that a woman could take the truth of things and put it into this novel and do it so elegantly and do it in a way that makes sense to everybody at the time. And that's why she's so important. Now, coming back to Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey is a response to these Gothic novels. It's a satire of them. So first off, you have Catherine Morland. And Catherine Morland is exactly the opposite of a heroine. She is, like most heroines in these Gothic novels, were accomplished and rich. Usually their mother was dead and they were raised by their father, and then at some point their father dies and they're thrown into the power of this masterful person who is mean and takes advantage of her and all that. And Catherine's not that at all. Catherine's actually kind of a tomboy.
Yeah.
She likes to play cricket. She would prefer to, one of the best examples of this is here in chapter 1, very first page. She had a thin, awkward figure, a sallow skin without color, dark, lank hair, and strong features. So much for her person. And no less unpropitious for heroism seemed her mind. She was fond of all boys' plays and greatly preferred cricket not merely to dolls, but to the more heroic enjoyments of infancy, nursing a dormouse, feeding a canary bird, or watering a rose bush. Indeed, she had no taste for a garden, and if she gathered flowers at all, it was chiefly for the pleasure of mischief. At least so it was conjectured from her always preferring those which she was forbidden to take. And so basically she's nothing like a hero. Yet Austen puts her into this situation where suddenly, she's a poorer girl. she is the one of 10 children, and her father, he's just a clergyman. And at that time, clergymen were respectable, but they didn't have to be rich. And some of them were, but her father wasn't necessarily. He had like $400 a year, which would have been respectable enough, but most people would have looked down their noses at it. But in any case, of course, she was one of 10 children,
Right.
too. And so she wasn't rich, but they had a rich neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Allen. And Mr. and Mrs. Allen are very fond of Catherine. And as she starts to grow up, they begin to see, well, she actually is quite a lady, and now she's reading all these novels, so she must be more interesting now. And so let's take her to Bath. And they decided to take her to Bath, which was a common occurrence back then, as relatives or neighbors, if they had a young daughter who was about 14 or 15, and they try to help each other out. Like the richer people who could afford to take these trips would take them with them, and that was considered a great compliment. And that was how they went out to meet husbands, as it were. And that's part of why Catherine is going to Bath, and she understands that to a degree.
Well, what's interesting to me is that I didn't really bring any preperceptions of Bath and what it represented to English society at that time. But as I got through the novel, I started to solidify a conception of Bath. Maybe you'll speak to this progress to summarize the plot, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's worth saying something about what Bath meant to time. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Can
okay.
you speak to that at
Yeah,
all? Yeah.
actually, that's very true. In Bath, particularly gout was a big problem back in those days. Gout being, of course, an inflammatory disease that affects the legs, and back in those days, the doctors were and the apothecaries would recommend sea bathing or going somewhere where there's more moisture in the air. And Bath was a coastal town, and it was considered, and they did have the old Roman baths there, and they were considered to be beneficial for those kind of complaints. And that's why yes,
Oh.
and that's actually why Mr. and Mrs. Allen are going to Bath, because Mr. Allen has gout, and so they're going for his health. And so they say, hey, well,
Ah.
why not? Let's just take Miss Catherine Moreland with us, because she's getting old enough and she's pretty, and Mrs. Allen needs a companion. And that's what it
Well,
boils down to.
well, does Bath have more the perception I got from the novel of Bath, that it wasn't just a place that people went to help with their gout, but that it was like refined society, and like if you wanted to marry up and station or find yourself, like this is, I don't know if it's
Yeah.
proper to call it superficial, hedonistic. It seems to be something very bourgeois, and and maybe you'll speak more to that, but I, different
Yeah.
auras to them. Some are working class cities, some have stratification of all different class types, but Bath seemed to me to be a pretty upper crust place.
It was to a degree. The gentry favored it, and
Mhm.
gentry being these are the people who are not related to the royal family. Those are nobles, but gentry is below that. These are landed lords. Okay, they own land, and they have for a certain number of years, and so they're gentry. And then you have tradesmen who are under the gentry, and this is at the point where some of the tradesmen were beginning to become richer than some of the gentry. And so you
Mm.
have a mixture of gentry and rarely nobles. I think it was mainly for the gentry and for the richer tradesmen going to Bath. And the richer tradesmen would have been looked down upon anyway by the gentry, because they have no title. but in any case, yeah, Bath was very upper crust. And granted, it did have its purpose. It was a port town. I think it was. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was a port city as well. And a lot of trade went through there, and a lot of the Navy would come and station there a lot as well. And of course, at this time, the English Navy was a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is during the Napoleonic Wars as well. But Bath was kind of one of those central points, like London. You would go for a season in London, or you'd go for a season in Bath, or sometimes you do both. And that was just expected of these gentrified people, of these country gentlemen and gentlewomen.
I think you raise an interesting point, and again, I hope I'm not interjecting and throwing you off your pace, but I think this will add something to the historical context of when Austen was writing and when this novel takes place. You mentioned that that the novel is contemporaneous with the Napoleonic Wars, and that will figure into one of the characters, specifically Captain Tilney, and would sort of explain his something I didn't understand. I mean, I'm just now sort of putting
Yeah.
the pieces together. In some way, would sort of explain his role within the British military. Can you say anything about when this was published and when it occurs precisely, and what's going historically? It's okay if you don't know. I'm kind of interrogating you and
Yeah,
springing you
that's
on
okay.
it.
I'm not entirely okay. This one was published posthumously in 1818. If I'm not mistaken, she would have written it around 1792 or three. And it wasn't one of her last books, but it was kind of in the middle. And she had kind of gotten a little bit. She had, of course, Austen never married, and by this, and being an old maid, was not as almost as bad or worse as being a servant. But she had kind of gotten a little bit jaded by this point, I think, and I think that's why she wrote Northanger Abbey, is so these girls wouldn't be fooled into this idea of Gothic romance. But excuse me. But in any case, yes, the Napoleon. There's the first Napoleonic War, which ended in him going to in Napoleon going to Elba, and then I'm not sure. I'm not very good with my history yet.
That's okay.
But I believe it was a span of just several months that he was on Elba. Then he escaped, and then came the Second Napoleonic War, and this probably would have been in between those times.
Yeah, I can actually look this up really quick. But you were saying that this book was published posthumously. Why? Do you know any reason like why it would have been published posthumously, or can we? And I think you were intimating, and I didn't know this, that that Austen may have been writing it late in life. You know, when I reading the novel, I got the sense that this was the production of a younger woman, but it made it sound like that this is the production of someone who was older and trying to pass on advice to younger women.
Well, that's just my opinion. That's just how I see it. But of course, Austen was barely even 40 when she died, and so she probably would have been her early 30s or early to mid 30s when she wrote this. And it was published posthumously because she lived with her brother Henry. I believe was his name Henry, but one of her brothers published all of the books that were not published while she was alive after she died.
Yeah,
because he was always a great supporter of what she did, and she lived with them for most of her life after her parents died, because she was an old maid. She had nowhere else to go. I believe that 3 or 4 of her books were published while she was still alive.
So it says, I just did a quick Google here, and it says the Napoleonic Wars went on for almost 16 years between 1779 and 1815. So how do we define this era? I mean, it's a pre-Victorian era.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you can say anything about the setting, the clothes. I mean, for our audience, how should they try to imagine this period in English history?
Well, they should imagine, especially for Jane Austen's world. Her world is almost entirely the gentry. Okay, and a couple of nobles show up here and there, but they're barely there. But she's talking about the gentry, and these women and these people would have been very fashionably dressed. It was like the middle class, only an upper middle class. So and depending on how much money they had, then they would dress in as much fashion as they could. A lot of the men didn't work at all. They just were going to inherit the land, and they were going to take over from their fathers managing the land. Younger
this would
sons,
speak to one. Yeah, this would speak to one of the main characters, which you've yet to introduce. Is is it Henry Tilney?
Henry Tilney. Yeah, he's a clergyman. Henry Tillman's a clergyman.
Okay.
And that's just barely mentioned that he is, but he's a clergyman, but he is the second son, whereas Captain Tilney is the eldest son. And Captain Tilney, like his father, General Tilney, joins the military. And General Tilney, I don't know, I believe that he might have been landed, but she doesn't really go into this, but I'm pretty sure that he would have likely been landed, because Northanger Abbey was said to have been in their family.
Yes.
And so maybe he was a second son and inherited it when his brother died or something like that happened. So it's not entirely clear what happens there. But that's the kind of that's the kind of environment we're talking about, though, is this world where your last name, how much land you own. It's actually in order of importance. Let me state it this way. In order of importance is name and title, how much land you have, and then, or who you're related to, number 3, and then how much money you have. And it really, and most people tried to marry up, because like they may have had a fail, like for instance in Pride and Prejudice, the mother is obsessed with her daughters getting married because her husband's land is entailed away to a cousin because he doesn't have any sons. And so the only hope for these women, these daughters, are to marry somebody who makes money. Because women could not do anything at this point. They weren't allowed to. All that women were in the gentry, again, we're just talking about the gentry right now. All that women in the gentry were allowed to do were be a lady, or become a governess, or maybe possibly a teacher, but that would have been very vulgar, or possibly a housekeeper for some relation who had a lot of money. That was all women could do. That was it. And so, that's why marrying up, and in situations like Northanger Abbey, balls and social gatherings and going to Bath and places and in London is so important to these women, because that's the only way you meet people, because otherwise you're at home all day, and it's not proper to be in company with a man by yourself. It's not proper unless you're already engaged, or even then you need to have somebody with you, a chaperone, or if they're married, that's the only time it's proper to be alone with the opposite sex.
That was the thing that struck me, or one of the things that struck me the most about the book, is like just how many layers of manners there were at this particular time. Like you mentioned, and you could only talk to someone if you had been introduced in this way and that way. It was all about manners. I couldn't believe it. I mean, part of it seemed like madness to me, but also part of me sort of felt like how those manners at a time, I guess, made things simpler. Definitely set up so many barriers that it made it harder to like yourself into a jam or something like that. But at the same time, it's so unnecessary.
Yeah, it was. And you're right, though. In a way, it did make things simpler, but it made things so much more complicated at the same time. It's just this whole idea of proper English society, and it's just what was expected of you. And you can't, women, like I said, you can't be, it's like they feared each other's natures, or they feared their own nature is what it was.
Yeah.
Even if like, for another good friend, Pride and Prejudice again, Elizabeth Bennet is said to have a great deal of wit, because in other words, she's smart and she's clever and she can come back at you with a great line. But that would have been somewhat improper at that time. Well, she shouldn't be smart. She's a woman. She should be reading all these novels and just paying attention to her needlework. And it goes even more into that in later authors like Bronte with Jane Eyre. It goes more into that with her, but actually Charlotte Bronte. But in any case, the thing about Austen too is this is a very early form of feminism. Her characters are not the meek little silent, I'm going to do exactly what mommy and daddy tell me to and never look a man in the eye. They are braver than that. All of her heroines are. They're all braver than that. They would have been feminists at that time if there wasn't such a thing. But, of course, Mary Wollstonecraft who later became Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. She was one of the first feminists, and she was writing, I believe, around in this time as well, maybe a little bit later. But yeah, it's very important, you know.
Well, this is really interesting, especially in relation to the character Catherine Morland, because on the one hand, she's not taken very seriously, right? And we should probably get to the plot a little bit. I mean, I find all this background information to be incredibly fascinating.
It's necessary to understand Austen. Yeah,
totally necessary.
Yeah.
But Catherine Morland, you know, and I think you may alluded to this already, she is obsessed with novels.
Yes.
And she's obsessed with one of the novelists that you mentioned, who wrote Radcliffe, who wrote this novel called Udolpho, which I guess this is real.
Yes.
And she's very fascinated by the Gothic and romance and whatnot. And she gets a lot of criticism for this. She gets a lot of criticism for being so enamored with books. And there's talk about how books are such silly things and only for women and whatnot. But at the same time, she ends up being the heroine of this story. And maybe we should talk about how she can some of the characters view her as silly, and yet how she becomes this feminist protagonist as well.
Well, once again, the thing about Catherine is this is the first time she's ever been out of her house. She has been at home helping her mother teach the younger children. She's been she's been spending her time just however she's going to spend it, doing needlework, helping out her mother. This is the first time she has ever been in society. Okay, so she doesn't know anything. She's never observed how men and women are with each other. She's never observed how some people can be deceptive and how some people can be more honest. But the thing about Catherine is, despite this, and despite her love of novels, which some would say shaded her information or kind of changed her perception of what she should expect from society, she's got her own inward judge. And she is aware of it, and she follows her own conscience in her own mind.
She's very discerning.
Exactly. She's stupid, or she's not stupid. She's ignorant, and that's the word that keeps getting used.
Do you think she's ignorant? I would say that maybe she's naive. Ignorant
in the old sense of the word, in that she doesn't know, and so naive would work. Yeah, not maybe more naive in the modern sense, but she's definitely not ignorant or stupid. I guess I thought of her as naive, and she wants to believe the best in people because she hasn't been exposed to it. But like, unlike so many of the characters in the novel, she does have a very strong moral compass, even though she is naive. Exactly. Yes, and that's what makes her different. She has her own judge. She doesn't care that much what other people think about her. Again, she's a tomboy. She didn't even pay attention to how she dressed up until very recently. I think she's 17, until she was maybe 15. She didn't pay attention. And so she watches all of this, and she's learning from it. And that's kind of the point of this whole trip, is for her to learn. Not only to meet a man to marry, but to learn from how people deal with each other, which in this world, in this society, outmaneuvering people on a social level is extremely, extremely important.
Right.
And it's not so much that you have to learn how to manipulate people, it's that you have to know how to read people. And because everybody is in this, everybody's going to be very polite. Nobody's going to like yell and scream, and nobody's going to pitch a fit. Nobody's going to argue in front of anybody while they're in a ball or among society. You have to have a more internal guide about these things. You have to just watch and look for these tiny hints about people and pay attention to what they say at one point and what they say later, which is very important with Isabella, Thor.
Yes. Yes, I was going to talk. I was going to
Yeah.
ask you if you could talk a little bit about some of this social
Yeah.
maneuvering
Yeah.
and how it figures into the plot of the story, and if you could talk about Isabel Thorpe, her brother,
Hmm.
and the love interest that maybe I don't know how far we're going to get today. Maybe just the
Yeah.
first volume,
Oh,
but
that's fine.
the love interest that Catherine develops.
Okay, well, let's start with Catherine. Of course, we've already figured out that Catherine's a very artless girl, and she's naive, but she has her own judgment, and she listens to it. And one of the first people she meets in Bath, let's start with George Tilney, or not George, but Henry Tilney. Mr. Tilney is a very much a gentlemanly man. He is smart. You can see that in the first conversation they have together. That he is extremely smart. He's clever, and he's funny.
What's
Catherine
the
doesn't.
first? Do
I'm
you
sorry.
do you, what do you? Maybe we should reference one of the first conversations they have because
Yeah,
I think it might be important for a theme. The
it
one I have in
is.
mind is about her dress, right?
Yeah, yeah. It was. Let me see here.
Because it gets referenced
I
over and
have it.
over and over throughout the novel.
Let me see. I have it here somewhere. Okay, here we go. Okay, now Mr. Tilney has just asked Catherine to dance, and now they're having this conversation about while they're dancing, which would have been expected. And this is what marks Tilney at first as a clever man who is going to be more sincere than many you might meet. Um, I have hitherto been very remiss, madam, in the proper attentions of a partner here. I have not yet asked you how long you have been in Bath, whether you were ever here before, whether you have been at the upper rooms, the theatre, or the concert, and how you like the place altogether. I have been very negligent, but are you now at leisure to satisfy me in these particulars? If you are, I will begin directly. You need not give yourself that trouble, sir. No, no trouble, I assure you, madam. Then forming his features into a set smile and effectively softening his voice, he added with a simpering air, "Have you been long in Bath, madam?" "About a week, sir," replied Catherine, trying not to laugh. "Really?" with affected astonishment. "Why should you be surprised, sir?" "Why, indeed," said he, in his natural tone, "but some emotion must appear to be raised by your reply, and surprise is more easily assumed, and not less reasonable than any other. Now let us go on." And then, of course, they go on for a little bit, and here he gets to the dress. He says, "You know exactly what you will say. Friday went," he's talking about her journaling, the experience. He says, "I see what you think of me," said he gravely. "I shall make but a poor figure in your journal tomorrow." Yeah. "Yes, I know exactly what you will say. Friday went to lower rooms, wore my sprigged muslin robe with blue trimmings, plain black shoes, appeared to much advantage, but was strangely harassed by a queer, half-witted man who would make me dance with him and distress me by his nonsense." This is how you can tell that Tilney is a smart man, and he knows how ridiculous all of this simpering and being polite is, and you can tell that he's something more than many of these men might end up being. And the part with his dress where he talks about how he talks to Mrs. Allen, who is extremely concerned with her dress, and that's pretty much it. That's all she ever talks about. The same way that Mrs. Thorpe talks about her children later, she mentions. He's knowledgeable about how much muslin costs because he has a sister, and Mrs. Allen is extremely impressed by this. But I would be too. Now, okay, even now, I would be impressed by
now,
this.
now, I've listened to some lectures,
Uh-huh.
Abbey,
Uh-huh.
and and I've listened to some lectures on Northanger Abbey, and a lot of people make up out of this scene about him commenting on the muslin of the dress, and I don't want to color the interpretation too much, but maybe you've heard this before. I mean, because this is supposed to be her love interest or something like that. some people have said that because he is so knowledgeable on these things that he's not like other men. Do you understand where I'm going with this?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's kind of ridiculous, actually, in
You
my
don't you don't
opinion.
you don't believe. I actually don't really take it that seriously either.
Yeah.
Like, but like it's only because I heard other people lecture on it that I was like, well, maybe there's something to that. Maybe part of the canon. I'm not an English teacher, so I don't know. But there is this theory that he's not straight.
Yeah, well, I can understand why people may have that theory, but in my opinion, this is another example of people reading too much into something. And of course, there would be no problem if that was the case. I wouldn't be bothered by it, certainly. But at the same time, people have to remember that back in those days, that was unheard of. Oscar Wilde was in jail
Right.
because he was open about it. He was put in jail because he was open about it. And this is later on, as I'm not mistaken. I get the years incorrect sometimes, but in any case, unless you were Oscar Wilde at that point in history, that didn't come up,
Yeah, I just don't
essentially.
know. Right. I don't know if Austen was maybe doing something subversive.
I really don't think so. The most subversive that she gets, in my opinion, is the feminism, is
Hmm.
the level of feminism shown in her novels, which is not much by today's standards, but by her standards, it would have been extraordinary.
Right.
And obviously not as much as Charlotte Bronte with Jane Eyre, but very much it was extraordinary, and that's about
I
as subversive as she gets, in my opinion.
Well, I wanted to ask you about it because I thought it was a little bit of a mountain out of a molehill, but
I
I wasn't an
agree.
authority. I wasn't an authority on the subject, so I didn't want to. It
Yeah,
just it seemed a little strange to me.
yeah. Well, it bothers. See, I'm one. I don't. Maybe this makes me a bad scholar, but in my opinion, it makes me a very good scholar. But I don't pay attention to criticism. I don't pay attention to literary criticism. I read it and I figure it out. That's what I do. I don't believe in literary criticism. And it can be interesting to look at it, especially from philosophical points of view. But at the same time, this story is meant to mean something, is not meant to mean something that deep sometimes. You know what I mean? I just like to read it myself and figure it out myself and look at history. The only reference I use is history. That's it. So
Yeah,
that's my
I have a, I have a,
piece.
I have a, I have a, I have a in regards to criticism because um, English is not my sort of natural training. Like I
Mm,
turn to it a lot of the times to sort of get my mind around these books.
yeah,
Uh, but at the same time, I can easily like it seems it seems to be in my in the evolution of my learning about literary criticism and literary theory that there are a lot of people within literary theory that are like it's okay to impute your own views upon the
yeah,
text because that's what the text is there for. Like I've done a lot of literary criticism. Like I've read like Foucault and Derrida and Barthes and stuff like that, where it's prioritizing what happens in the subjective
yeah,
experience of the reader. And if you want to hear a reading of the text, or if you want to do a Marxist reading of the text, or whatever, like that's okay. If like that's fine because there's like no truth to any of it. Like,
yeah,
and I don't know. As a philosopher who seeks truth, like that these are hard positions for me to hold, to simultaneously like just play with the text and make it mean anything, and at the same time always be in my other field in philosophy, always trying to get at the heart of things.
yeah. Well,
You understand what I'm saying?
yeah, I was with me. I see. My field is literature, English, and with me, what I pay attention to is the way that it's written. I pay attention to the grammar that is used, the sentence structures, and I pay attention to the characters, to the characterization. I pay attention to the historical context, and I think about the author and what they what other things that they've written and the themes that they tend to represent. I just don't. It takes a lot of the enjoyment out of it for me to try to look at it from any other perspective other than mine. You know what I mean? And I just can't understand trying to twist words around to make them mean what you want when the author is the one who had the original meaning, and they wrote this so you could take it your own self from your own experience and take it with you and use it.
So there's obviously a little bit of irony going on here, because we're making the claim that like we should confront the text head on, but at the same time, and I don't think it's illegitimate. Sorry, my voice cracked. I don't think it's illegitimate. You very early on made the claim that this is a feminist text. Now, did you obvious to you, or did you get that from criticism, or is this just like it's written all over it?
It's obvious to me, but again, knowing what I know about this time in history, and knowing what I know about Jane Austen and her work, I do find it feminist because, again, you have these women with their own minds, and that was unheard of at that time. A woman having her own mind, heaven forbid, I could never marry a woman like that. And actually, Tilney says something about it later. I think it's Tilney. It's either Mr. Tilney or Miss Tilney. I don't remember which one. But yeah, so at some point they say, well, you may prefer a stupid wife, but men of certain intelligence prefer this kind of thing. And she knows who her audience is, and she talks to her audience in this way. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. She understood this in a way that women would have been afraid to have admitted at that time. So
that's awesome. Yeah. It's disguised, and she kind of knows how to say things without saying them. It's kind of an awesome feature of literature. So maybe we should say something a little bit about how Catherine is different from a lot of her contemporaries, a lot of the men and women that she encounters in Bath, aside from the fact that she seems to have this moral compass. I guess maybe we should say something about the individuals,
the Thorpes.
A little bit more. Yeah, the Thorpes, and we can say a little bit more about what Tilney's character means. I mean, he seems to be very well-mannered, very, very authentic. Maybe foil him with his brother, who we'll meet or something like that. I'll let you do what you do. You
you do kind of have to look at these characters with their foils. And the foil is for each of them is a little bit, it's up for interpretation. Okay. For me, it's, in my opinion, there are three with the men. Of course, there's Mr. Tilney, Captain Tilney, and Mr. Thorpe. And you compare these three. You particularly compare, really the people we should be comparing are Mr. Tilney and Mr. Thorpe, James Morland, and who is Catherine's brother, engaged to Isabella, and Captain Tilney. Okay, and then with the women, you need to look at Catherine. We're setting her aside because she's a heroine, but with the women, we need to look at Isabella and Eleanor Tilney, Miss Tilney, the sister. Now let's just start real quick with Mr. Tilney and Mr. Thorpe because they're the two main ones. Of course, we've mentioned Mr. Tilney is very smart. He's a very gentlemanly man. As a matter of fact, he talks to the master of ceremonies, who before he is introduced to Catherine, he gets the master of ceremonies to introduce him to Catherine, which would have been very proper. Okay.
Right.
And just to meet her, and then you have John Thorpe. John Thorpe, who cares about nothing but the quality of his carriage, how fast his horses go, who is vulgar, extremely vulgar for the time. He even uses the word damn, which is amazingly vulgar back in that day. And especially among women. That would have been, oh no, at that time. We're just not even going to talk to him. But in any case, Thorpe he's just this vulgar, mean-spirited man. Like, a great example of that is how he takes it upon himself. Okay, one of the big important scenes that gives you the character of the Thorpes versus Catherine and the Tilneys is when Catherine has agreed to go for a walk with Miss Tilney and Mr. Tilney some afternoon. And she's already told Miss Tilney, I'm going to do it. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. It's all set. And then here come the Thorpes and James now, her brother. And they said, well, they had already tried to make this excursion to Clifton to see a Blaze Castle. And it got given up, and now they're trying it again. Of course, we haven't gotten to that. But anyway, they're trying it again. And poor Catherine is being harangued by both Thorpes and her brother. Say, you can change her. You can change them. You can change her mind. You can go change it. We have to go today. We have to go today. And we're not going if you don't go. Just really pressuring her and do this. And she's like, no, I've already told this lady that I'm going to do that, Miss Tilney, that I'm going to go walking with her. And she keeps trying to, make them understand this. And she had already, kind of insulted her, because at one point they were going to walk before, but she thought maybe she'd given up. And John Thorpe tells her, oh, well, I saw them head in this whole other direction, so they must not want, they're probably not going to come call on you. So, and this is an outright lie, we find out later. And that's a perfect example of John Thorpe. And in the second scene where they're trying to get her to go again, but she set up this arrangement to go walk the second time, then he goes and talks to Miss Tilney himself and doesn't allow Catherine to do it. Like, he just goes off by himself and say, hey, Miss Tilney, I understand you were going to do this with Miss Moreland, but we want her to come with us, so she's going to do it tomorrow. That was extremely untoward of Mr. Thorpe. So basically, he's not letting already, they're not even involved, and he's not letting her make her own decisions. He's not letting her handle her own stuff. And Tilney is sitting there trying to educate her. Well, here's how you draw later on. They're on walk, and Catherine says she wants to learn how to draw. And Tilney says, oh, well, you need to think about this, and this. And he seems to want to educate her, whereas Thorpe just wants to command her. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's very obvious in some of these scenes with John Thorpe, where he takes it upon himself to change her plans for her. And that's the big difference between Thorpe and Tilney. They're polar opposites completely.
Right.
All right, now let's go to Isabella and Miss Thorpe. Now, Isabella is, everybody in the United States or anywhere in the world has met this girl. She is bubbly. She's so sweet, and she loves everybody. And oh, you're my favorite person in the world. And then 5 minutes later, she's changed her mind, and now she's off doing this. And that's Isabella Thorpe. The first time you get a hint of it, the first time she talks to Catherine. She
has this eruption of emotion for Catherine. She claims they're going to just be friends for life, and they barely know each other.
Exactly, and a lot you find out later. Part of why that is because she knows that she's related to James Moreland. But at the same time, but she's just so. I can't find it exactly, but when she first meets Isabella, uh, Isabella's talking about a Miss Anne. Like they discover they both love these gothic romances, and they both love reading.
Yeah, they love like Byron and
Yeah, well,
and well, or they're intrigued by him, but Udolpho is the thing.
yes, they
Yes,
love these gothic romances, and and that's where they kind of first kind of find common ground. And they they start off by talking about that, and that remains one of their bonding things. But when after they're talking about this, and she starts talking about Miss Andrews, and Miss Andrews is another friend of hers. She said, "Oh, she's gorgeous," and "Oh, I get on to all the men for not thinking that she's prettier," and I just love her. And then like not 5 minutes later, she says, "Oh, I just think you're so pretty, Catherine. I would love for you to meet Miss Andrews, but she's so insipid. Like at one second she's beautiful and awesome, and then she's insipid." And that's where you first kind of see it. And then you start to see it more and more, until finally in the second volume, she okay, the best example, when Catherine really realizes that there's something up with Isabella. They're at a ball. Isabella has accepted James Moreland's offer of engagement. And oh, I love James. I do anything for him, and I don't care how poor he is. And they go to this ball. She's like, oh, I'm not going to stand up. I'm not going to dance with anybody because I don't want to dance with anybody but James. Not 5 minutes later, here comes Captain Tilney. Captain Tilney, this roguish. Again, he's every bit as vulgar as John Thorpe, but he's got that suave, handsome thing about him. He's got the mystique, and Isabella, of course, loves this. And
good girls love bad boys.
Well, see, that's the thing, though. Is Isabella a good girl? No, she's not.
No, she's not. She's not.
She's not a good girl.
She's two-faced from the jump.
Exactly. But anyway, Captain Tilney comes along, and she dances with Captain Tilney, and Isabella and Catherine sees all of this while she's dancing with Mr. Tilney. And she's like, are you kidding me? And she feels affronted. I would too if I saw my brother's fiance dancing with this dude and flirting with him. Okay? And yeah. Isabella does this in full sight of everybody. And Catherine can't believe it. And this is where you really see that Catherine's got good judgment. She has her own mind. And she's like, wait a minute, this ain't right. And she tries to get and she even tries to get Henry Tilney to call off his brother. She said, wait a minute, this ain't cool. Talk to your brother. And of course, Henry's like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it because that's just how he is, basically, is what he says. And it's just, and that's where you really see why it really, as far as in the Gothic romance structure, in the satire, the evil baron that she thinks later is General Tilney is actually the entire Thorpe family. The Thorpes, Isabella, and the Thorpes, and of course Captain Tilney. These are the evil barons in this story, because they keep trying to keep her from what she wants, but they do it in this polite way. And that's kind of what I think Jane Austen wanted to show people with this novel, is that you don't need Gothic romances to see people doing people wrong and manipulating and trying to take over their lives. It happens to us under our noses every day. And I think that's part of what she was trying to say with this. And it's true. And it really is. I mean, you can apply this to even modern relationships and situations. Is the real evil barons are those people who try to bring you down, and that's what the Thorpes do. That's what the Thorpes are trying to do to Catherine, is bring her down. And the only reason they're doing this, we find out, because they think she's rich for some reason, and nobody knows why. They think they're rich. She's rich.
Isn't there some rumor that gets spread either by the association with the Allens and they having money, or the Allens spread?
That's what it is.
Yeah.
What is that they as the Thorpes have the Allens. Of course, Mrs. Thorpe and Mrs. Allen know each other already, and so I'm sure that the children learn a lot about her from Mrs. Thorpe. And yes, Mrs. Allen is a rich lady, and Mr. Allen is a rich man, and they don't have any children. And so they're all thinking, oh, wait a minute, if they're bringing Catherine to Bath with us, then maybe she's kind of going to be a ward for them, and when they are gone, she's going to get their money.
Yeah.
And they have no reason to believe this, because that wasn't how things worked back in those days. It's just misinformation and reaching for straws, needing money, because the Thorpes are very poor and they're desperate. Yes.
And it's not just the Thorpes that buy into Catherine coming from a lot of money. I mean, it's going to get. I mean, with General Tilney, and we'll explore this probably more in volume 2. He's under. From what I understand, he believes it as well, that she comes from a lot of money, and this is how she gets her invitation to Northanger Abbey and sets up
exactly
a number of series of events. And maybe we want to talk about that the next time we get together.
Yeah, but the thing is General Tilney gets his information from John Thorpe.
Yes.
And for some reason, and basically John Thorpe presents it to him like she's going to inherit all of the Allens' wealth. That's how he tells it to General Tilney. And Tilney doesn't have any reason to doubt it, because he sees her with Mrs. Allen, and she's a very sweet lady and a young girl, and she's pretty, and she's dressed well. And so he doesn't have any reason to doubt it. And then until later, of course, when the fit hits the shan with them. So it's just.
I love your tasteful ways of avoiding profanity here.
I do what I can, man. I used to be a teacher. What are you supposed to do?
Well, so I think we've covered a good amount of ground. We've probably been going for like 45, 50 minutes. I'm not exactly sure. I guess the question is, where do we want to leave our audience off? We should probably think about bringing this particular session to an end. Not immediately. I mean, we can talk about a number of things, but what do you think we should try to accomplish in this first installment that we haven't already accomplished?
Let me see here. I got to think of what we really need to talk about before we go on. The thing about it is, sorry, I got my notes, and then I got my brain going on a different train of thought and everything.
We could talk about like the satire element of it. We haven't really spoken a lot about we haven't really talked about Catherine's wild imagination and how she projects the Gothic onto her entire world, but then things aren't. I'll let you take it from there. But that would be one of the satires things that we could talk about. Yeah.
Again, the main thing of Northanger Abbey is a satire of the Gothic novels, particularly The Mysteries of Udolpho, which was written by Anne Radcliffe. It was her most famous book. And I've actually found a list online, and there is a list of characteristics that a Gothic heroine must have. And Catherine has the opposite of all of them.
Okay? I love it.
All right, so the common characteristics. Okay, this is Catherine. Catherine's pretty, but her mother's still alive and she's very robust. So the rule was that whereas Catherine's mother's alive, a Gothic heroine's mother was usually dead or very ill. And usually the Gothic heroine is kind of sickly and you know, and tragic, of course, and very extremely divinely beautiful.
Yeah.
Catherine's okay. And her mother's still alive and perfectly robust. Okay, there's one.
Oh, can I ask you a question about this list that you're going off of? So other people can go and take a look at it, and we make sure that we give the proper credit. Do you know the website or where you got it from?
You know, I really should have written it down, shouldn't I? But
That's okay.
I did. I can't even remember where it was. I just did a Google search for Gothic heroine, and it came up.
Let me see if I can find it while you keep going there.
But in any case, all right, first of all, there's that. Okay, the second one is that the Gothic heroine is usually very accomplished, particularly in drawing or music, and she's always, she likes to be outside in the garden. She, like in that first part that I read, they say that Catherine, she says that Catherine didn't nurse little birds to health or whatever, but Gothic heroines were wont to do that, like in Sleeping Beauty. Basically, there's like the Sleeping Beauty idea of a heroine. Okay, and with Catherine, she's just not very accomplished, and all she can really do is read, and she might be able to play a few notes on the piano. And also the Gothic heroine is extremely ladylike and you know and this airy. She always has this airy, super ladylike, super poised disposition. You know, she's always perfect. Catherine was a tomboy. She's a tomboy, and she likes to play cricket. And the other one is, again, most of these Gothic heroines like to be outdoors and tend gardens, but Kathy just goes and picks flowers because she's not supposed to. And that's kind of that list that I saw, and basically, and Jane Austen does go one by one by those and tell the opposite as far as Catherine is concerned. Okay, so first of all, that's Catherine. She's exactly the opposite of a Gothic heroine. And then you get to the other main idea is Northanger Abbey. Okay. Northanger Abbey is an old manor house, and all of these Gothic romances take place in these old, huge, ancient manor houses, and they always have, and actually there's a mention of it, they're usually like abbey or castle or something like that. It's like something very grandiose, and they always have a lot of hidden passageways, secret rooms, and there's always some of it's in some manner of disrepair. And when she hears that she's going to Northanger Abbey, she gets so excited because she's going to be going to one of these super awesome castles where these things happen, and she's going to be able to look for secret rooms and everything like that. And then when she gets there, there is an air of mystery to it, because she starts to get a little sense that there might be something up with General Tilney and the death of his wife. So basically Eleanor becomes the Gothic heroine for her, because Eleanor has been she's been denied the person that she cares about by her father. Her mother is dead. She's very accomplished and very pretty and very elegant. So Eleanor's really the Gothic heroine in this. That's Mr. Tilney's sister. But in any case, the mother apparently had some kind of illness, and Catherine detects a kind of a bitterness amongst the Tilneys, particularly Eleanor and Henry and their father. And when she gets to Northanger Abbey, she hears all these stories about how her mother died. Eleanor wasn't there when her mother died. Well, she got ill very quickly, and she died very quickly.
Yeah, Eleanor wasn't even there when her mother
Hmm.
got sick and died. She was away. Now, Mr. Tilney was there.
Yes.
And maybe you want to elaborate on this for a second, and maybe I missed it while I was trying to look up that comparison contrast of
Hmm.
of Catherine and the Gothic heroine, which I was unable to find. So maybe
Uh-oh. I'll
that's
find
okay.
it.
We'll find it at some point. But something we might want to talk about is, why Catherine, and maybe you already said this, why Catherine is at Northanger Abbey. Why did General Tilney invite her there, and why is Eleanor not fully happy, even though she's got all these amazing characteristics of
Hmm.
being this beautiful, accomplished young woman that fits the more Gothic heroine? Can you maybe talk about? It all goes back to
Yeah.
the class, the class struggle or whatever that's going
Yeah,
on in
yeah,
her
pretty
time.
much is what it boils down to. But of course, Catherine gets invited to Northanger Abbey because General Tilney thinks she's rich, and Eleanor is very fond of her, and they've all become very good friends. And so General Tilney says, "Well, why don't you come with us? Come hang out, you know." And that was actually fairly common in those days. Like if a girl is particularly good friends with another young lady, then a lot of times the other young lady's family will invite her to keep the other one company when maybe the father is off away and the brother is off along a lot, and so maybe they could keep each other company, and that would happen sometimes. And that's basically the idea here is that, well, Eleanor's going to be by herself a lot, so why don't you come with us and hang out? And Henry likes you, so maybe y'all get married and give us some money, kind of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And but in any case, so she goes with them to Northanger Abbey, and Eleanor, she's very elegant, but she's kind of quiet, kind of reserved, and she's
She,
not entirely happy.
she's a
And
pretty sad character. She's been
yeah,
deprived of something, right?
exactly. And you find out later that she actually has a beau, a man that she wants to marry, but her father doesn't approve of him because he is not rich. And
No.
that's where the tragedy comes in with Eleanor. And actually, later on, Catherine finds a note I believe that Eleanor wrote it to her beau, and she thinks it's a letter that Eleanor's mother wrote to a mysterious beau at some point. Maybe she had this idea. Catherine has this idea in her head, like maybe like a Gothic heroine, Eleanor's mother was forced to marry the general, and he killed her, and all of these horrible things that she thought. And the reason why General Tilney doesn't want her going into his wife's room is that she might find evidence of the murder or something like that. And that's all kind of plays in with this idea of the Gothic romance, because that sort of thing did happen. There were always secret rooms. There's always some sort of horrific surprise around the corner. Something's haunted. There's something secret about this room. That's the way that those novels were written. And
But what's interesting about Catherine is that she has this imagination
uh-huh.
that, especially when she gets to Northanger Abbey, where she starts, I don't want to say hallucinating, but imagining that, like,
Yeah.
like all this sort of Gothic stuff is going to occur. Like
Hmm.
she there's that trunk that she opens up, and
Yeah. It's
and
a laundry list.
yeah, and she finds all these old documents, and she thinks she's going to find something super mysterious, and
Hmm.
it's like you said, it's just like a honey-do list or a to-do
Yeah.
list or
Yeah.
something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And and this is an interesting thing, is that you were talking about this being a realist novel, and I'll let you complete the summarization of it. I won't give it away. The things that she thinks happen, the supernatural things, aren't real. Like they don't happen, but the reality in some way is almost more messed up,
Yeah.
is almost darker and more depraved than any sort of supernatural thing she could project
Yeah.
onto her environs. You want to say something about kind of what I'm getting at here?
Yeah, that is pretty true here. She imagines that again, this supernatural air to this old castle, and it does kind of in infest her imagination with all these images of these horrors that may have taken place. But the thing about these Gothic romances is that the heroine always comes out on top. She ends up with the man she loves, and she rides off into the sunset, and all these glorious things happen. She gets her inheritance, and they're all rich and happy and have lots of babies. And that's the way they usually end. But the way that Catherine, and when Catherine is leaving Northanger Abbey, it's exactly the opposite.
But we should say what happens before she leaves Northanger Abbey. Like what is she, so she, and maybe you've said this already. What does she suspect General Tilney of having done?
Yeah. She suspects General Tilney killed his wife. She thinks that that's what happened, but then she finds out later that General Tilney married her for her money, and that he never really loved her, but she loved him. And so essentially, and General Tilney by nature is a cold, hard man, which is very like a villain in these Gothic romances, but it's much worse in his case because he has he hasn't committed any crime. It's just that he is a cold, hard man who cares nothing about anything except money. And
but what do we find out about this dynamic that so she and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure we get this point, is that Catherine lets Henry know that she suspects, or Henry figures it out, that she suspects that General Tilney killed his wife, their mother. But and he gets very, very cross with Catherine. And she thinks that this is the reason why she is sent suddenly home.
Yes.
In disgrace from Northanger Abbey.
As any girl would.
Yeah. Right. So she's in the middle of the night, General Tilney tells her, get the F out of here, and puts her on a public stagecoach, not proper at all.
Exactly. Yeah,
and she has a frustrated love affair, and then bring it all together for us.
Okay, yeah. So basically, Catherine decides to go and inspect Mrs. Tilney's old bedroom, which General Tilney won't touch, and he won't let anybody in there. And he gets ill at Eleanor for even suggesting going in there. And so Kathy finally sneaks in there. And she doesn't really see anything extraordinary, honestly. But then Henry Tilney comes in and catches her at it. And she can't help it. She tells him the truth. That, well, I thought that maybe your father killed your mother. And of course, as anybody who has been accused of this, whose family has been accused of this, Henry Tilney gets really angry. And Catherine is so dejected, she runs back to her room and she cries all night and she feels awful. And in the midst of all this, here comes Eleanor saying, "Oh, well, I'm really sorry." And she can tell that Eleanor's not happy about it. But she's like, "I'm really sorry, but I have to send you home tomorrow really early in the morning. My father's demanded that you go home by post and I don't remember everything, but she has to go by herself." Now, at this point in time, it was unheard of for a lady to be sent home alone, to travel alone. That would be considered the greatest of snubs, to be sent home without accompaniment. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially on the Midnight City bus.
Yeah, it was all. I believe it's super early in the morning. Like he just wants her out of there. He doesn't
Yeah.
care how it looks. He doesn't care what anybody thinks because she is below his notice because he finds out that she's not rich.
It's not because, and we'll find out later, it's not because she speculated that he may have killed his wife. It's all because he realizes that her station is not
Exactly.
what he wants for Henry.
Yeah, but the thing is, she thinks that that's what it is. She thinks she's getting sent home because she suspects General Tilney of this murder, this horrible act, and that's what she thinks all the way, almost to the end of the novel. And like I said, any girl would think that. If you feel really ashamed about something, then if any kind of negative reaction, even if they don't know, what you did, you're going to assume that that's what it's about, and that's how she feels. And she feels so dejected, and I would too. I mean, she feels ridiculous. And this is where Catherine really starts to see the error of her ways. It's like she's got this great imagination, but she got carried away with it. And she sees kind of what she did, and she can almost kind of compare her behavior with Isabella's, which we know is nothing near that. But at the same time, you can kind of see her kind of feeling that bad. You know what I mean? And so, and so she basically leaves Northanger Abbey dejected, thinking that she is the worst person in the world, that she's accused this innocent man of murder, and now Henry Tilney is never going to come talk to her again, and Isabella's going to hate her, and or Eleanor's going to hate her, and it's just a horrible thing that a girl would have to go through all at once, and in a carriage by herself, on top of this great insult of being sent home without anybody in the carriage with you. That was a massive insult, and it is felt by the Morelands later on.
But there's but we're not done with the story yet. No. There's one sort of big thing that comes out of this. So we find out, and you should tell us, we find out General Tilney, doesn't send her home because he's upset about the speculation.
Yeah.
What do we learn? Because I guess I'm trying to, Henry Tilney, right?
Yes. Henry Tilney visits her, and she, of course,
and what does he reveal? Yeah.
What he reveals the whole truth about what again, I didn't get my notes that for, but he reveals the whole truth about Eleanor, the whole truth about General Tilney, and about why she got sent home. And that's the big deal here, is that she learns that she got sent home because John Thorpe lied about how much money she had. And she suffered all of this humiliation for that horrible act of John Thorpe. And it's and you look back at it and you think, well, it probably was intentional, because she didn't like him. But in any case, and then
the other big thing is that maybe General Tilney was not so innocent in his wife's passing.
Exactly.
And maybe you can speak to that.
And that.
So in what way was General Tilney not innocent?
Well, in that way, he basically did. Henry Tilney does say that that General Tilney did basically kill his wife, but he did it slowly. He did it with coldness. He did it with lack of feeling. He did it with harshness. It wasn't an actual murder. It was more of a long. Having to deal with years and years of what we would call today emotional abuse. Okay.
So when the general's wife did get sick, it was very easy for her to shuffle off this mortal coil because she had so much emotional baggage. right?
Exactly. She had no, yeah, she had nothing to hang on to anymore. I mean, she didn't have the strength to fight it, and she was, and in her, and probably in the way that the Tilneys feel about it, at least the brother and sister feel about it, is that she just gave up, and
Yeah.
she would have been happier anyway, and they do feel like it's pretty much their father's fault that she died because of the way he treated her throughout their lives. And that's what you were saying, as far as the truth is so much more messed up than just a murder of passion. This is years of contempt and
This is like torture.
It's torture,
Yeah.
yes, it's absolute torture. And you begin to understand, looking back at some of the instances with General Tilney, of why the brother and sister are never happy when he's around, why they had such a good time when he left, when they all were at Northanger Abbey, and why maybe Captain Tilney's the way he is. You know, they begin to see, and you begin to look back and see these things for what they are. And that's that's the point that Austen's trying to make, is people do this stuff to each other every single day, and it's not as glamorous as a Gothic novel. It's much more heinous and much more painful what people actually do to each other than what people do to each other in these Gothic novels. And that's the lesson. Yeah, that's the lesson you kind of have to bring out, that I think she hoped her readers would bring out of it, is that don't let your imagination run away with you. Just keep in mind that what you imagine it could be, it's probably something much more mundane and much worse. So.
It's kind of this banality of evil, right? Like dwarfs, like she like it's normalized evil. It's like right in front of your face, but in a lot of ways, it's more outrageous than vampires and whatever else is associated with Gothic. I think of the vampires. Last night, your discussion of Falling House of Usher.
Oh yeah.
So it's that Gothic short story and this are interesting parallels.
Yeah. Actually, I've been rereading the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, and I was thinking, I was kind of thinking the same thing. It's just like, this is realistic vampirism that I'm about to talk about now.
Right.
And actually Tilney says that. He says it is a kind of vampirism.
He does say that. I thought that was interesting. So what happens with Catherine and Henry?
Well, of course, as in all of Jane Austen's heroines, because the thing about Jane Austen, despite her realism and despite that huge aspect of her, of how she calls it like she sees it, despite all that, she is an idealist. And that's kind of the way I feel about my writing, is that I'm an idealist as well, but I'm realistic too. And and what happens with Catherine and Henry is that she finds out that at first he might have been teasing her a little bit just to kind of play with her, but then she discovers that he fell madly in love with her. And so so they do end up getting married, and Isabella ends up in disgrace, and James goes on and does his thing, and it all ends well for the people who deserve it, and badly for the people who deserve it.
But Henry has to do something, right? I mean, because Catherine is below his station, right? In order for him to marry her, what has to happen?
So so basically, Henry tells her all of this when he visits her at Fullerton. But Henry tells his father, he finds out what his father did to Catherine, and Henry is livid about it, absolutely livid. And and then he says, well, you know what? I'm going to marry her anyway. And so what happens is General Tilney completely disowns him.
Right.
And people actually did this in that day. They actually did that. If you married below your station or against your family's expectations, then you would be disowned and disinherited. That means you get none of the family money. You are an outcast. You've got to make your own way. You don't exist to us anymore. So that's what happened to Henry Tilney.
So Henry gives up all his riches to have Catherine
Morland, who is the opposite of a Gothic heroine. And that's, in the long run, that's the greatest irony of them all. You know, the heroine is not a heroine, but she still gets what she wants. But the way she gets what she wants is by being true to herself and her feelings and her own thoughts and her own moral compass. That's how she gets it. She doesn't get it by being pretty and flattering like Isabella. She gets it by being herself. And this is, again, a feminist idea.
So it's a little bit of having your cake and eating it too.
Exactly, yes. And it is. And again, you have to admit that it is very idealistic, but that's why I love Jane Austen. And that's why I think so many people do, is this actually could have happened. You know, it's unlikely, but at the same time, you have this very realistic turn of events, these very realistic characters, and then this very idealistic ending. And that's what everybody wants, I think. I hate shows like Breaking Bad and stuff like that because they're so cynical. And it's just like everybody sucks and everything sucks. It's all I can think of when I watch shows like that. But when I'm reading Jane Austen or a similar novel, I'm just like, okay, there's hope for everybody now. I feel much better about the world.
So why do you think? Because Henry had so much to lose, right?
Yeah, he did.
So much to lose financially. And I understand. Like Catherine shows that she's her own woman. But why do you think Henry's willing to make such a sacrifice to be cast out by his family and to be disinherited and stuff like that? What do you think impels him to do that? Because Catherine's cool. Like she's like she likes books and she's her own woman and stuff like that. But on the line, why do you think maybe he'd be willing to roll the dice on that? Or is it?
I think that as a woman, you don't always think about that. That's why you need men to read these things. We need to understand each other here. I think that I think that maybe what happened with Catherine and all of this leading up to it, I think it really maybe opened his eyes to his father's hypocrisy. And it really might have opened his eyes to his brother's horrible behavior and all of these really, nasty things that were existing in his family. So maybe he was relieved to be rid of it. Eleanor was always going to be his sister. Because they were always kind of peas in a pod. And Eleanor did end up marrying the man she wanted to marry. But then she gets disinherited as well.
Well, what did they know? What did they know about people who marry for money? It ultimately kills you, right?
Yeah.
Because they saw their mother destroyed by the false marriage. So they knew it was better to hold out and wait for love for a person that was different from everyone else because they had moral rectitude than to compromise yourself and marry an Isabella or a Thorpe or any of these other types of characters.
Yeah.
That taking any other route would lead to the to the destruction of the self.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. Is that it would result in the destruction of the self. That's why the mother was so unhappy and so ill, because she couldn't be herself. She was kept from being herself, and that's why Eleanor and Henry always seemed so miserable around their father. And yet, that's basically what it is. In this society, in that society where money rules everything and society is everything, that you, in order to maintain your sense of self, you either have to be poor or you have to break with your family and be poor. And basically, in order to be yourself, you have to be poor. So, and that's a good way of putting it. Like I said, it would have been worth it it would have been worth it to me. Hey, I can work. I don't mind working. I'd rather, be happy than rich. And I think that's what these cover is. They're just not used to not being rich. And so they don't see a glimpse of what it might be like until they meet people like Catherine and say, oh, well, maybe it won't be so bad.
do we know what happens after they get married? Do we know what their lives are like? I don't know.
See, I always get curious about that sort of thing, but there's no sequel or anything. But basically, if you want to talk about what happened to people in those days after they got married, if they actually did marry for love, then they had a lot of kids. Yeah, and that seems to be the running theme in most of Austen's works, is that the parents who seem to really marry for love always have a lot of kids.
Well, maybe they end up repeating what she grew up in, which seemed to be a loving family.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I think about when I see the ending of that, or I read the ending of it. It's like, yeah, they probably were a lot like her family, and like you said, that was fine. Her family, and there are several cases in which Catherine says, well, as long as my brother's happy, my dad's going to say yes. And you have hints of that her family, they're happy as long as everybody else is happy, and they don't care about the money, and they don't care that there's 10 kids, and they're actually pretty happy about it, and they have friends and they have things that they can do, and so there's nothing holding them back from getting what they want other than that money. So
right, and I see this in direct contradistinction to the House of Usher, because they never marry, right? They stay in this house, decays and falls into the tarn or whatever. They're incestuous or whatever, and they can't produce any sort of offspring. And and here we have characters that probably I don't know, breed like rabbits and live on love.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much, man, pretty much.
But I don't know what's more fantastic. I would like to see a follow-up. I'd like to see a sequel, Living On. I'd like to see that Jane Austen novel, Living on Love and Breeding Like Rabbits, and what it's really like.
Yeah,
because I imagine, I can imagine having 10 kids could get pretty crazy.
Oh.
So we covered a lot of ground. I actually didn't expect us to get this far. We might have been able to accomplish all your educational goals in this one. I think we made a really great seminar here.
I think so.
And we can talk off air if you want to revisit this stuff, and maybe you want to take a week to think about whether or not you want to come back to any unaddressed themes or whatever. But I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too, actually, because as far Northanger Abbey is one of what would be considered one of Jane Austen's more minor works, and we got to the heart of it, and that's what we needed to do with this. I could go line by line if we wanted to, but that just gets boring, and you just need to read it. I think we pretty much got it covered. Now, if we were doing Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice, and it'd probably be a little bit more, but I think we got it for Northanger Abbey.
That's cool. Maybe just imparting, and I don't know I'd like to get your opinion of Northanger Abbey, because my little bit of research on it is that it's not ranked highly in her authorship. It's a lot of people think it's one of her worst works. What? But you chose it, and I asked you to choose something that you loved. You obviously think very highly of it. A lot of people think it's not very good. Why do you think where do you see it in her authorship, and why do you like it so much?
Well, with Northanger, now I'll admit the Northanger Abbey is not my favorite of hers. Of course, I haven't read Emma or Mansfield Park yet, but my favorite is Persuasion, actually. But in any case, and that's a later one. But I think that most people, I love Northanger Abbey because it's so funny. It's hilarious to me.
Yes.
And it is a satire. And this, as far as this is pretty much the only satire that she wrote. And I think that people don't like it because it's not her usual. It's not her usual story. It's a different sort of story. But and the characters are different, and there, it's not like, maybe there's not as much depth of feeling, as it were, in Northanger Abbey as there is in something like Persuasion or Pride and Prejudice. It's more superficial, but the thing is, that's the point of it, is that it is a satire, and those Gothic romances are very superficial. And whatever feeling is in there is all melodramatic. It's all drama. And that, I think that's probably why people don't like it that much. And it is, like I said, it's one of her minor works, but I love it because it's hilarious. I just think it's hilarious.
You know, and I'm so glad that you chose it, because like, look, I'm a 36-year-old dude. I'm not sitting around reading Austen novels. And had you not pressed me on it, like, my impression of Jane Austen would have been like that of which I had when I was like 16. Like, oh, this is like, I don't know, this
Girl
is like
book.
girl book, like what. But I'm so thankful that you had this conversation with me and forced me to read it, because like, I love Jane Austen now,
yeah,
and maybe other people will love Jane Austen as a result of this conversation.
Yeah, people tend to forget that Jane Austen is among the most. She is up there in English literature with most scholars. She is up there with Shakespeare, not quite as high as him, but she's up there, and because she did something completely different. And she did it very well, and her writing is just so elegant, and her characters. Like Shakespeare, the magic is in her characters.
Yes,
they are real people, and you can see them in your head, and you can hear them talking to you. That's why Jane Austen is important. And she's not just a girl book. I think dudes would learn a lot by reading Jane Austen. They would learn a lot about women.
I agreed.
Yeah. Now I would say every man needs to read Jane Eyre, but I think every man needs to read Pride and Prejudice too. At least Pride and Prejudice. Because, I'm sorry?
Well, what I'm saying is, I hope you've enjoyed this, because I want to keep learning.
Yeah, okay.
And I hope, you know, maybe what I can do to my dude bros, maybe I can be an Austen ambassador, and you know, maybe I can make it so that they feel okay.
Yeah.
Prejudice or some of this other stuff, because I'm sold. I'm in it. I love it.
Yeah. Just tell them, especially if they're not married and they're looking for a lady, they need to understand Jane Austen, because that will be the secret. Because the thing is this is written from a woman's point of view, and it's written about women, and it is as true today as it was then, on a very basic level. And that's the thing.
I feel like I'm getting like a cheat sheet.
Well, y'all need to know because y'all drive us crazy. And if y'all read some Jane Austen, maybe y'all wouldn't drive us so crazy.
I love it. Well, hey, you do. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. This is one of the more animated conversations I've had about a book. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you.
Too.
And I it is obvious that you love the material so much. Like, I feel like you could just stand on your head and do this. It was amazing what you brought to the book. You are welcome back anytime. And Austen, Bronte, whatever you want to do, I'm so game. And you just tell me what you want to do, and I'll go read it, and we'll put something else on the calendar. I think people are going to love this series that we're doing.
Cool. Yeah, I'm down with it, man. I'd love to do more Austen. And I said the magnum opus for me would be Jane Eyre. That is my favorite book in the world. And
all right. Well, you think about what you want to do, and just let me know when you want to do it.
All right, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's bring this transmission to a close. And I want to thank everybody that listened today. I hope you got as much out of it as we did. I want to thank Jennifer so much for being our guide and our teacher today.
Thank you, Luke.
Yeah, and hopefully you'll become a regular. Honest to God, I hope we have this conversation as much as possible, as much as I can keep up with all the other seminars I'm running and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'll end it, and I'll put this on the Noetic app so everybody can listen to it, and you can watch it on YouTube and everything like that. And be sure to share it with all your friends.
All right, thank you.
All right, take care, Jennifer.
You too. Bye.
Bye.